Hi, this is Jennifer with the Witch's Tree of Life, a progressive witchcraft community. There's just been a lot of activity, both, conversations with friends, conversations with students, conversations with dear and near loved ones. But I've been reflecting about my own personal practice and kind of what that means and the lessons I've learned over the years. And I've come across this idea of a sacred spiral. This idea that, well, just speaking of my own journey, when I decided that I kind of grew up in a quasi-Baptist family, and I rejected that quite early on. And so I was looking for something new. I went through being an agnostic and various things like that. But pretty early, in high school, I started finding books on witchcraft. A lot of it resonated, some of it didn't, and I kind of spent a lot of time in being an agnostic. Went to college, comparative religion, philosophy classes, psychology classes. So there was a lot of ways I just kind of flowed through the years. But at a certain point, I decided to formally study witchcraft. And I really kind of marked that as the beginning of my current spiritual path, my current spiritual journey. And so I've been reflecting upon that and kind of conceptualizing it not as a circle with this beginning, middle, and an end, but conceptualizing it as a spiral that many times throughout our spiritual journey that will spiral down into the center to find our core of ourself and the core of our practice. And then we that sets the terms, that sets kind of where we're going to go. What are the books that we're going to learn? Where are the teachers that we're going to seek out? What are the ways what our practice will actually look like on a daily basis? How we become to service to our community, and we spiral out. And then comes a point where we might get caught up in the bells and whistles, the trappings of a tradition, of a particular paradigm. And we have to then kind of go through this period of reflection, self-reflection, and we spiral back down into the core. Through that process, we find our path. One of the early wisdom teachings that I came across when I first started teaching, studying witchcraft seriously, was this axiom, which know thyself. Dorian Valente's Charge of the Goddess, one of the last lines in it that's always spoke to me, is that which thou seekst, if you do not find it within thee, you will never find it without thee. And of course, that's paraphrasing. And to me, that has always reflected this teaching of finding your core. And even when I was talking about doing this video, the person that I was having this conversation with, they were like, are you talking about the core of your practice? Or are you talking about your higher self? And honestly, what I mean is both. That what is the core of our self? It's the thing that remains when you strip everything else away. When you strip ego, when you strip trauma, when you strip indoctrinated belief, when you strip learned behaviors, whether they're adaptive or maladaptive, when you strip all of that away, what is left? I am who I am. I am who I am becoming. You're stripped down to your core, and that core then becomes the guiding principle that guides your path. And that path can take a lot of forms. You can define it through witchcraft, or you can define it through, secular humanism. You can define it in a bunch of different ways. So we start with the core, and then we spiral out. And many, many times in our journey, many times throughout the years, we might reach the end, and then we get kind of distracted with the bells and whistles. Another conversation that I've had recently is this kind of distinction between solitary witchcraft and tradition witchcraft. And that should be, or should I be a pagan? Or should I consider myself just spiritual? Am I being trapped in a dogma? All of those questions are this kind of peripheral, this outer reaches of that spiral. Whether we get caught up in, fancy new ways of meditating or fancy new ways of, I was reading Christopher Penczak's blog today. Well, it wasn't a blog, it was a post on his Facebook page about how he was almost a Kundalini yoga instructor. And he talks about that. You get pulled out, You're seeking information about metaphysics and you end up in a Kundalini yoga course. Eventually, we reflect upon that, where we are, how we got here, and we spiral back down to the center. In witchcraft traditions, we call this shadow work. It has a lot of names and a lot of ways to do it, but we begin again to strip ourselves back down. And sometimes that means stripping ourselves of the lessons we learned in the traditions that we were raised in. Whether that's raised in our childhood, or whether we may be initiated in a particular witchcraft tradition or a particular world religion. But there comes a time when we have to question. We have to question where our energy is being directed, and does it still resonate with that core? That's a scary place to be. We find our center of identity sometimes in those external rings. We find our identity in, I'm a witch. I'm a progressive Wicca. I was raised in, I haven't been, but, whether you identify as a British traditional Wiccan or Gardnerian, whether you identify as Golden Dawn magician, ceremonial magician, whatever, there may come a point where that no longer resonates, that no longer holds truth for you. You may have had experiences that have kind of made you question or made you just realize that you've outgrown. What do you do when you feel like you're being pulled off path? Look at what's going on today. A lot of us that have kind of practiced in the different forms of spirituality, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of a pretty toxic political cycle. The pandemic is pulling our attention in ways that are incredibly important for our health and for our family, and homeschooling and maybe working from home. Maybe we're being pulled into political tribalism or conspiracy theories. A lot of people in the metaphysical community are being pulled into these very extreme spheres. Is it true? Does it still resonate? Have you lost your core? Have I lost mine? These are just things that I have been reflecting on lately. And so to me, it is just this lesson over and over and over again. I remember that sacred spiral. I remember not to get caught up in the Seven of Cups. Not to get caught up in all these choices and all these bells and whistles. And I'm not devaluing any of these choices. They're valid. They're important. But they can pull you from the core. There might be a place where you have, they might have pulled you from the core. So I guess if I'm going anywhere with this conversation that I've been having with friends and coven mates and witchcraft students and clients, is that, again, am I talking about that connection to self, or am I talking about that connection to practice? Both. When you spiral into that center, when you spiral into that core, and you reconnect with the higher self, that dictates the choices you make. It dictates the teachers you find. It dictates the professional choices you make. It dictates how you expend your energy. And the core then leads to that path. Getting back to the original question, what is my spiritual path? What is my purpose? Sometimes the purpose is the journey. Multiple times throughout your life, you're going to spiral out and spiral in. And for me, that process alone became my spiritual path. That there isn't not a destination that I'm seeking. It's the process in and out. Each new lesson's learned on each rotation along the spiral. I hope that just some food for thought. That is something I've been thinking about lately, and I wanted to share with you guys. Please have your comments below if you have any questions. Feel free to join us at the Witch's Tree of Life community. Until next time.